New York thought it had seen corruption before. It had seen crooked politicians, dirty saloons, backroom deals, police officers who looked the other way for the right price. But in the summer of 1912, Gotham was about to face something darker. A gambler named Herman Rosenthal stepped outside the Hotel Metropole near Times Square. He had just accused a powerful NYPD lieutenant of corruption. He said the police were not just enforcing the law, they were selling protection from it. And then, in the middle of the night, gunmen appeared. Shots rang out. Rosenthal collapsed on the pavement. Within hours, every newspaper in New York had the story. A gambler was dead. And at the center of the scandal stood Lieutenant Charles Becker, an NYPD officer accused not just of taking bribes, but of ordering murder. This is the story of the crooked cop who shocked Gotham. Years earlier, Theodore Roosevelt had gone to war with corruption inside the New York City Police Department. He challenged corrupt officers. He embarrassed political bosses. He walked the streets himself, searching for cops asleep on post, officers drinking on duty, and precincts that had grown comfortable under the protection of the political machine. For a brief moment, Roosevelt made the NYPD afraid. But Roosevelt could not stay forever. And once he left, the city did what it always did. It adapted. The old system did not disappear, it changed shape. The saloons kept pouring drinks. The gambling houses kept operating. The politicians kept making deals. And some officers still understood the oldest rule in Gotham. Power could be bought, protection could be sold, and the badge could become a weapon. Early 20th century New York was a city of light and shadow. Broadway was glowing. The streets were crowded. Hotels, theaters, saloons, gambling rooms, and backroom clubs filled the city with money. But beneath the noise was another economy, an economy of vice. Gambling houses needed protection, saloons needed warning before raids, bookmakers needed police to look the other way, and the underworld needed men inside the system. This was not always simple street-level corruption. It was organized, it was political, and it reached into places where the law was supposed to be strongest. The question was no longer whether corruption existed. Everyone knew it did. The question was how high it went, and how far a man with a badge would go to protect it. Charles Becker was not a gangster hiding in an alley. He was a lieutenant in the New York City Police Department. He had rank, he had authority, he had the power to arrest, raid, intimidate, and destroy lives. To the public, the badge meant law. But prosecutors would later argue that Becker used the badge for something else: control, money, fear. The case against him painted a picture of a police lieutenant tied to the gambling world, a man accused of using his official position to collect money from illegal businesses and punish those who crossed him. In that world, protection was not always offered by criminals. Sometimes, prosecutors argued, it came from the very men sworn to enforce the law. And anyone who refused to cooperate could suddenly find himself under pressure. This was the danger Becker represented. Not simply corruption, but corruption with a badge. Corruption with legal authority behind it. Becker's story was not just about one officer. It was about what happens when the line between police and criminal begins to disappear. Herman Beansy Rosenthal was not an innocent reformer. He was a gambler, a bookmaker, a man who lived inside the world of illegal money. He knew the back rooms, the betting slips, the whispered arrangements, the late-night payoffs. Rosenthal did not stand outside the system pointing a finger at it. He had been part of it, and that made his words even more dangerous, because Rosenthal knew how the system worked. He knew who paid, he knew who collected, he knew which officers were feared in the gambling rooms of New York. He understood that the gambling world did not survive on luck alone. It survived on protection, on warnings before raids, on money passed from hand to hand until the law itself became part of the business. For men like Rosenthal, corruption was not an abstract idea. It was real. It had faces. It had prices. It had officers who could close a gambling house one night and allow another one to operate the next. Rosenthal had spent years inside that world. He knew that illegal gambling was never just about cards, dice, or horse races. It was about power. Who controlled the rooms, who controlled the police, and who could survive when the two became impossible to separate. And then he talked. Rosenthal accused Becker of corruption. He claimed the lieutenant had a role in the gambling world and that police power was being used for private profit. That accusation was explosive. Because Charles Becker was not just another name on the street. He was a police lieutenant, a man with authority, a man who represented the badge. If Rosenthal was telling the truth, then the scandal was bigger than one gambling house, bigger than one payoff, bigger than one angry gambler trying to save himself. It meant the underworld had reached into the police department itself, and once that line was crossed, Rosenthal became more than a gambler. He became a witness, a threat. Once those accusations reached the press, the danger changed. Because newspapers could do what gambling room whispers could not. They could carry the story across the city. And for men who depended on silence, that was enough. Rosenthal had broken the oldest rule of Gotham. He talked. And in Gotham, men who talked too loudly often did not live long. On a July night in 1912, Rosenthal was at the Hotel Metropole. The city was awake. The lights burned bright. Cars moved through the streets. Men and women drifted in and out of hotels, theaters, clubs, and saloons. Then Rosenthal stepped outside. In seconds, the night changed. Gunmen opened fire. Rosenthal fell dead near Times Square. The murder was not hidden in some forgotten alley. It happened in the open, in the heart of New York. And because Rosenthal had accused the police before he died, the killing became explosive. The Becker-Rosenthal case centered on Rosenthal's murder near Times Square, and the case became one of the most infamous police corruption scandals of progressive-era New York. The question spread across the city. Had an NYPD lieutenant ordered a man killed to keep him quiet? Newspapers seized the story. The public demanded answers. Politicians felt the pressure. And suddenly, the murder of one gambler became something much larger. It was no longer just a homicide. It was an accusation against the police department itself. If Becker was guilty, then the badge had not simply failed to stop crime. The badge had protected it, and possibly ordered murder to preserve it. Every headline made the scandal bigger. Every witness added another layer. Every name connected the case to a world of gambling rooms, police payoffs, and political influence. Gotham had seen corruption before, but this was different. This was a police lieutenant standing at the center of a gangland murder case. And if the accusation was true, then the line between law and crime in New York had vanished. The trial became a spectacle. New York had seen courtroom dramas before, but not like this. Not a police lieutenant sitting at the defendant's table. Not a man with a badge accused of ordering murder. The prosecution made their argument clear. Charles Becker did not pull the trigger. He never had to. He had men for that. Men who owed him favors. Men who feared him. Men who understood that when a lieutenant gave an order, it was not a request. One by one, figures from the underworld stepped forward. Gamblers, middlemen, hired gunmen, men who had paid Becker, feared Becker, and now were willing to talk. They described a system, not a crime of passion, a machine, protection money moving from gambling houses to police hands. And when Rosenthal became a threat, when he stopped being a quiet participant and became a loud, dangerous witness, the machine did what machines do. It eliminated the problem. Becker denied everything, but the city watched. And the city was not sure what to believe, because the men testifying against him were criminals, men with their own reasons to cooperate. The jury convicted anyway. Appeals followed, a second trial, a second conviction. 5 men were sentenced to death for Herman Rosenthal's murder. 4 were the gunmen. The 5th was Charles Becker, the man the prosecution called the architect of it all. The trials asked a darker question. Whether the system built on silence, on payoffs, on protected vice, had now produced its ultimate crime. Not a robbery, not a street fight, but an organized, deliberate murder, ordered by a man wearing a badge. The photograph freezes Charles Becker on the road to Sing Sing. Once, he wore a badge that gave him power across Gotham. Now the uniform was gone, the protection was gone, and ahead of him waited the death chamber and Old Sparky. Inside the death house at Sing Sing, Charles Becker seemed like a different man. Gone was the powerful police lieutenant who once ruled parts of the Tenderloin with fear and authority. Now he spent his final days reading. He helped the prison chaplain with Bible classes. He read Shakespeare aloud to other condemned men. And one play stayed with him, Measure for Measure. Becker said there was something in it that seemed to fit his own case. Its words about judgment, mercy, guilt, and death stayed with him as the clock moved closer to the end. For a moment, it had seemed as if Becker might escape the chair. In 1913, the Court of Appeals overturned his conviction, saying the verdict was shockingly against the weight of evidence. Becker believed it proved what he had said all along, that no frame-up could go all the way to the finish. But the victory did not last. At a second trial, prosecutors came after him again, and again, Becker was convicted. Now, his last hope rested with the governor, Charles Whitman, the same man who had built his reputation prosecuting Becker. Whitman refused to intervene. In his final hours, Becker wrote to his wife, the woman he called the queen of his heart. She had never stopped believing he was innocent, but belief could not stop the sentence. The state had made its decision. Guards shaved part of Becker's head. They dressed him in a black cotton suit with no metal buttons. The power was gone. The uniform was gone. The protection was gone. The badge that once gave him authority could not save him now. At 5 o'clock in the morning, on July 30th, 1915, Charles Becker walked into the death chamber at Sing Sing prison. His final words were a prayer. "Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." And then it was over. Charles Becker, the NYPD lieutenant, once accused of standing at the center of a murder, gambling, and police corruption scandal, was executed by electrocution. Gotham had punished the crooked cop. But the deeper question remained. Had justice truly reached the men behind the system? Or had New York simply sacrificed one man while the machine kept running? That is the question that still hangs over the Becker case. Was Charles Becker the mastermind? Was he a scapegoat? Or was he both? A guilty man sacrificed so New York could pretend the larger system had been brought to justice. Theodore Roosevelt had exposed the rot inside the NYPD. But Charles Becker proved it was still alive. And in the summer of 1912, Gotham learned that corruption did not always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it wore a badge. Anyways, we are the Gotham Police Files, watching the past so we can understand the present. And together, we keep police history reborn. I'll see you in the next chapter.